Good. Let's get started. So today's talk is about how to write a research project, really of any kind, how to write a research project at any level. I hope you don't expect to become better writers by the end of this session. So in about an hour, you're already better writers. I generally say, you're not going to become better writers by believing me, by believing what I say, but by doing as I say, right? So I'm going to give you some tips, some instructions, some suggestions for what you could do. And these are things you could start doing already tomorrow. And if you're listening in that spirit of what is Thomas trying to tell me I could be doing every day to become a better writer, not what is Thomas saying is good writing or what are the rules, that kind of thing. But think of it more as what is the activity I'm proposing that you repeatedly engage in, then this will make you, as we go, a better writer. I'll return to that point as well. There's usually 3 different reasons that you're sitting in this room today. So I think we can talk about those. The first reason that you're sitting in this room is that you are worried about getting your research project done on time, producing enough prose, enough writing to pass the exam, basically, right? So you are thinking in terms of productivity, and this is a business school, and we are not ashamed of dealing with productivity issues squarely and head on. I sometimes call this approach writing process re-engineering for that reason. So it's really a matter of looking at the unit of production and figuring out how to make it efficiently going forward. Some of you may not think you have that problem. You may always have done your assignments on time. You always are very productive writers. You write easily and freely. You always think of word limits as kind of constraints that are, keeping you confined. They're not goals to reach. And those people may still want to sit here and listen because there's another concern, which is, will you be recognized for the bright ideas that you have? Of course, there's a cynical twist on this. Will I get the grade that I deserve? I've done all the research. I'm really smart. I've learned all the things I need to learn. But does that show in my written work? Right? So that's not a productivity issue. That's a question of whether or not you're an effective writer. Good writer, right? Is your writing a clear representation of the competence that you've actually acquired as a student? That makes sense? Those are two things, productivity and effectiveness. Now, some of you may have met people who are very, very productive and very, very effective. These may be your teachers, actually. They may have published a lot. They may be very famous for their ideas, so they're obviously successful. But if you talk to them about writing, you realize that they are miserable human beings. They're unhappy about the business of writing. It gives them no pleasure. Those people exist. They're very successful, but it's a chore. It's a pain to write. We can fix that too. So it's productivity, effectiveness, and happiness that I'm going to sell you today. It's a real consulting product, right? And like any consulting product, I'm going to take the consultants out on this. Like any consulting product, if it doesn't work for you, it's because you're doing it wrong, right? Now, fortunately, I work at a library. And like any librarian, I am a lonely human being. So if you are trying some of these methods that I'm going to show you today, that I'm going to present to you today, and you're running into trouble with them, and they're not quite giving you the productivity, effectiveness, or happiness that you were promised, then you are more than welcome to write to me and say it's not working. And then I can ask, well, are you doing as I said? Right? And then I will remind you of what I said, and then we'll see. Right? We'll see if we can get it to work properly. In that sense, I'm basically just a coach. Right? But the more you do this, I think you'll see the kind of intuitive, plausibility of this. Good. I hope you all still feel like you're in the right room. It's always a good thing to get out of the way. I don't use any slides. I do, like I say, have a lot of, like, you can click in on the material, so there's lots of more reading to do and so forth if you want. I have a very simple pedagogy. I'm going to draw a picture and I'm going to ask you to guess what it is. And if you can't guess it, I'll give you a clue. And if you then can't guess it, then I don't know if I can help you. Right? So it's kind of a risky strategy. It's not a very risky strategy. I think you'll see when we do this. Just shout it out when you think you know what it is. There's lots of clues on my website as well, if you've been paying attention. It is indeed an iceberg, and here is the clue that makes it the universal symbol of an iceberg. I think by this time you would have all gotten it, right? So there's no worries. It is an iceberg. And why do we start with an iceberg when we talk about writing? Some of you may have already run into the iceberg in organizational culture, that field, if that's what you're studying. I guess I'm using it kind of in the same way, but this is an older lineage. Ernest Hemingway, the novelist, Papa Hemingway, the champion of writing, greatest writer that ever lived, at least in his own kind of conception. He used to say, quite wisely, that the dignity of the movement of an iceberg lies in only 1/8 of it being above water. Right? So the dignity of the movement of an iceberg lies in only 1/8 of it being above water. Now, you can easily imagine what an undignified iceberg would look like. Right? So you go to the beach and somebody brings an inflatable iceberg to the beach, blows it up and puts it out in the water. Now that's going to be convincing for about half a second. You might think, ooh, there's an iceberg at the beach. But of course, as soon as you see it move just a little bit on the waves or because the wind is blowing it, you realize this isn't an iceberg. It lacks something that icebergs have, which is they're just sitting there in the water like mountains, right? That's why we call them bergs. That's what Hemingway was after. He was saying, look, what you want to do is put your writing is on the surface, but there's got to be something under the surface that you're not writing, that you're not putting on the page, that is giving your writing its dignity, right? And that's an important thing to keep in mind. You're holding something back. You're not saying everything you have to say. You're choosing things that will effectively create this dignified object over the surface. And we have to think about exactly what that means. And Hemingway had a great way of thinking about this. He would have a story up here, of course. So he'd have a story about bullfighting, or a story about war, or a story about love. And what he would say is, if you want to write a good story about bullfighting, war, or love, you would have to have the relevant experience. Right? So he would put experience under the surface of the writing. And then he would say, and then you tell your story. Even if you're writing a fictional story, it should be grounded in experiences that you've actually had. Right? Again, we can easily see what an undignified story is like, because I'm sure you've all either done this or at least heard somebody do this. You hear a good story, and then you tell it like it's your own. So, it's basically how gossip works, right? You tell a story, and you say, hey, here's a great thing that happened. And then certain details in the story turn out to be a little hard to believe or hard to understand. And so what happens is you get asked questions. Why didn't she just call him? Right? Couldn't they just have canceled the flight? Right? Simple questions about matters of fact. Now, if it's your experience you're talking about, you have answers to those questions, or you have what we sometimes call plausible deniability. You have some good reason for not having those answers, and it all makes sense in the way you're telling the story. Right? There's something underneath the iceberg that those questions can gesture at. But if you've only heard the story and the only thing you know about the story is the facts that you've been told, then you have nowhere to go to answer those questions, right? So there's nothing under the iceberg. And that story very quickly falls apart, right? And if you really have been presenting it as your story, it's kind of embarrassing now, right? It's not dignified, right? That kind of thing, we all know that sort of thing happens. No reason to be ashamed of it any longer. You're all forgiven. But just remember that what you want to make sure is that there is something underneath there. And you might think, well, is our research project, is that really just based on experience like that? And I would say part of it is, and there is actually, it might not be the part you think, but there is actually a part of an ordinary, straightforward, totally classical research project that is just a presentation of your experience. And in a certain sense, your lived experience, but a very formal part of that lived experience. And that's the part that's underneath your methods section. So you'll probably, if you're doing a research project, you're going to be collecting data of some kind using some sort of method. Maybe you're doing semi-structured interviews, or you're doing surveys. Maybe you're going to our financial databases like Bloomberg and so forth, and you're extracting data sets to analyze. So lots of different things you could be doing. But what you're doing is making decisions about the right way to collect data, going out into the world and having experiences that are going to be formalizable in such a way that they can be given to you for analysis, right? So you can tell the reader what you did and why you did it. And it's as easy and as hard as being honest about those things, right? It can be hard to be honest, right? But you just write the details of why you decided to collect data in the way you did. Why did you talk to these people and not to these people? Why did you design your interview guide in this way or your survey instrument in this way, right? You're going to be explaining it, and you're constantly going to be gesturing at the reasons a reader might have to doubt you, right? Perfectly rational, reasonable reasons to doubt you. You're going to write your methods section saying, well, I did these things so that you could trust my data. So it's really just, the method is really just the true story of how you collected your data. And now we're starting to see that this iceberg is a little more complicated than just your personal experience. In fact, what we would say in academic writing is that it's the art of writing down what you know for the purpose of discussing it with other knowledgeable people. So there's knowledge on both sides of that equation, right, on that transaction. You have to know something. You have to imagine a reader that knows something as well, right? And so we're going to now talk about, well, what is this whole thing? If it's beyond experience, if there's more to it than that, what is it we call knowledge in an academic setting, right? What is it that it really is? Well, first of all, it's experience that's turned into something that can be given, and that's just, data is just Greek for what can be given. So what can be taken for granted in your analysis. And so, of course, when you're writing your analysis, you want to make sure you have your data underneath it to support that. Likewise, this experience isn't just going to be any old experience. It's not like it's not like you just said, well, what I'm going to do today, and then you went out and had some experiences, and you're going to call that your method, right? That's not how it works. You've made a plan. You've been very rational about it. You've probably had some methods instruction, and you've done some reading in some methods handbooks, right? So there's a whole scientific tradition that has given you a literature, right? And maybe, depending on what level of your studies you're at, you've even been sent out to do an actual literature review of previous research in this area. And in that literature review, you've been given some hints about what is taken to be good method, right? Which is to say, what sorts of experiences should one have before one claims to know something about this kind of organization or this kind of market or this kind of product, right? What is the experience that you should be having in order to justify your empirical claims, right? You learn that by reading the literature. And at some levels, you're just reading your course literature, and at other levels, you're doing a review of the research that's been done in this area before to find the answers to that question, right? But of course, this literature review doesn't just turn into your experience. It also turns into your theory section, right? Now, remember Hemingway's wise words here. Only 1/8 of it is above water, right? So there's going to be a lot more literature underneath that you've read but are not going to be using directly. You might be referring to parts of it, but not all of it. You're going to have done a lot more reading than you will actually be explicitly writing about. So the task of writing the theory section or even the literature review section, which we'll talk about next week if you're here, is not going to be to present everything that you've read. It's going to be to present the tip of that iceberg so that it indicates a breadth of reading. Right? We've got the outer flanks of this iceberg here. This is really the core, right? So theory, method, and analysis. That's really core of a research project. It's the thing you want to get right. And it also means that underneath that, you want to make sure you have this basis in a good grounding in the literature. You want to make sure you've done something interesting to collect your data and that you have some interesting data. That's really going to be the thing that's going to anchor and center your research project. Always go back to those things. Make sure that that's in order when you're writing. But there's some things on the outside as well. One of them is what I sometimes call the background section, or what I call the background section. It doesn't have to be called that. And in fact, none of these headings that we are talking about necessarily have to be these. This is just sort of, so just general gestures. The background section is going to be based on documentation. And that's because when you're writing your background section, what is happening is you're deciding what does the reader need to know that the reader probably doesn't already know, right? And what do we mean by that? Well, the reader probably already is aware of your literature, right? So your reader, and we'll talk more just in a second about exactly who your reader is. But since your reader is a peer, so your reader is somebody who is in your program, right? Who's in the same discipline, right? They're probably aware of the scientific literature, but they may not be very knowledgeable about the particular company or the particular country or the particular product that you have studied, right? So that all those things that you've learned about your particular object, you may need to give the reader some background information about, separate from the data you've collected on them, right? So this is going to be stuff that you know because you're familiar with the object, and the reader doesn't know because it's new to them, right? But what you have under the iceberg is important. Just because you have, you've been in this organization maybe for a while, or you've looked at this topic for a long time, and so there's lots of things that you know are just true about it. You can't ask your reader to trust you on that. You have to make sure that as you're learning these things, you find the relevant documentation. So that could be annual reports from companies, could be newspaper coverage in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, blah, 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 the Danish papers as well, of course. So there's going to be a lot of information out there that you can use. You can even use things like OECD data. And of course, the library is happy to help you get access to all of these things. But you're going to want to cite sources that help your reader to know these things as well as you do. So the reader doesn't have to say, well, I read this, I read this research project, and I think it sounded plausible. I think it was true. You can actually give them the sources so they're as knowledgeable as you now, right? That's why you want to make sure you have some documentation under the surface. And now it's feeling a bit lopsided. It's feeling like it's going to tip over into the water here. We need to put something over here. One of the sections that we're missing is the discussion section of your research project. Right, now you can see it's starting to look like the complete thing here. You're probably going to have some kind of discussion. And this is where you talk about the consequences of the fact that you found out what you found. So you've discovered something interesting about an organization or a product or a market or something like this. And now you're in a position to say, we need to do this now, right? These are the consequences of that, or what we sometimes call the implications of that. And the question is, what could support the discussion? Right? What could support the discussion section of a research project, since we've pretty much used up everything? Right? This is almost like the basis of our knowledge is all used up. We've taken all the entire media coverage, all the publicly available documents, right? We've taken all of the literature that's in the scientific journals. That's all covered now as a category. We've even taken your experience, everything you could have learned from experience and everything you've done and seen. And we've taken the data that experience has generated. So your data set already has a place in your project. So what now are you going to base the discussion on that isn't any of that, right? And this is where it's really important to remind yourself that you are an intelligent human being, right? That you are, and I realize that we're about to be replaced. I'm sure you've heard that there are tools out there that are pretty close to replacing us on this score, but we are in fact actually intelligent, which means we have something that is very, very important. It's called reason. The ability to make logical conclusions, right? To draw logical conclusions from established premises. So if you think of all of this support you're doing here, right? All of this stuff you have under the surface as something that is supporting the background theory, method, and analysis sections, then what you need to get to the discussion is your capacity for thought. And it's, in some disciplines, it's very, very logical. Like you have to really be very, very logical in your deductions and so forth. But you have to remember this is discipline specific. So what's always happening here is you're thinking about your reader and you're thinking about yourself. And you're thinking, what do we think is reasonable to conclude from this analysis, right? What is a reasonable implication to draw from the analysis that we have? So just keep that in mind. Like, don't overthink the rationality or reasonability of this, right? So how to write a research project? Come on in. And so I usually, just because it says REA there, I like to remind us that just to have a nice little slogan here. We're going to do some reading and we're going to do some reasoning. And that's sort of the basis of it. Notice lots of this is reading up here. And then over here, to get our method in order, to design our observations, our experiment, and so forth, we're going to use our reasoning, and especially to do the data analysis, we're going to really have to think as well, right? So just keep that in mind. This is what you're claiming is under the surface, and this is what is on the surface. There's two sections missing. And I like to put them in sort of layers up here. One of them is the introduction. And notice that the introduction is on top of this, right? So the basis of the introduction, what's under the surface of the introduction, is actually not under the surface of the water. It's not invisible to the reader at all, because your basis for writing the introduction is the rest of the project. The ideal author of the introduction is the one who has written all of these sections, right? So so because you've written all of this, you can write the introduction because that's what you're introducing. And then, of course, the reader, when they get from the introduction to this, will want to not be disappointed. So you want to make sure you get that introduction right, that it's actually introducing what's underneath it. Yeah? And then finally, there's the conclusion. And the conclusion is way up on top of the iceberg cognitively because it's the highest point. It's really what you're reaching at the very end. It's the strongest position you want to be in when you're writing. Right? You want to be in a position to write that conclusion in a strong and detailed way. Right? That's a big sketch here, right? Just to kind of present the problem for you, as it were. But do notice that this is also the program for this Craft of Research series. Right? So what we're going to be doing over the next, I think, 12 weeks or so, right, is we'll go through each of these sections. So we will talk about how to do a literature review next week. Then we'll talk about how to write the theory. And I'm not going to get the order exactly right because I've been skipping around a bit. We'll talk about how to write the background, the method, the analysis, and the discussion all on separate Thursday evenings. We'll talk about how to write the introduction and conclusion. That's one separate evening as well in the program. There is, about halfway through, there's one called How to Structure a Research Project. And that's where we'll take this, and instead of making it all in a picture on an iceberg, we will set it up nicely like an outline, and then we'll talk about the relationship, the rhetorical relationship between the different sections. Right, so we'll go through what is the relationship between the theory and the analysis, this sort of thing. We'll talk about how to get a good sense of structure. And then there are two sort of at the end, there's one called How to Finish a Research Project. I encourage you to look at that one before you get to it, because you want to make sure you have a good plan for how you're going to finish, well in advance of getting there. You don't want to leave that to the end. But we'll talk, what we'll do is we'll talk about how to use those ideas that are already there on the page to get you through the last few weeks of your writing process. And then the very last session is how to do the finishing touches like formatting and referencing and that kind of thing. That's, I'm going to have a talk about that, right? I think it's 12 sessions altogether if I remember the count. And of course, like I say, you're welcome to attend as many or as few of them as you like. You can pick and choose. The ones you miss, if the technology works, we should have a recording of it for you. So it should all be good. All right, so this is the thing that I'm going to try to tell you tonight, how to make in a common collected way, and in a way that if you work in this way, you will become increasingly productive and increasingly effective and increasingly happy, right? That's the idea. Now, I fully understand that this looks very daunting. This looks like a very big thing, and it feels like I've thrown you into the ocean, and now you have to push around an iceberg. And that's not what we were thinking exactly this was going to be. So I don't know if you know, there's a media theorist from the 60s and 70s called Marshall McLuhan, very famous for the slogan, "The medium is the message." He came up with a lot of good slogans, and one of them was, if you don't like my ideas, I've got others. It's kind of a quaint thing to say. So I've also got another one. If you don't like, if this seems too big to you, I got another picture to draw for you. I'll show you. Can you guess what this is? It's not a cup. It's an ice cube, exactly. See, we're working metaphorically here, right? So if this is not to your liking, if you think, I gotta wait for a glacier to have a piece fall off into the ocean, and that's how I'm gonna write. That metaphor is not good for writing. What we need is, I need to go to the freezer, get out the little tray, pour water into it, put it back in the freezer. That's how I'm gonna do my writing, something manageable, right? And so the question is, what is this unit of production? Now, I have a talk from last semester, and you're welcome to go and look at it as well. It's linked on the page, called How to Know Things. And in that talk, I try to say at university, there's a special kind of standard for knowing. And we have really 3 criteria for whether or not you know, right? One of them is, if we give you some information, can you make up your mind? Can you arrive at a belief about that matter? And can that belief generally be true? And do you have good reasons to believe it? Right? So do you have a justified true belief about it? The second thing you want to be able to do at a university before you claim to know something is you want to be conversant about it. You want to be able to participate in a conversation with other knowledgeable people about it. And that really means with each other in your courses. It means in the cohort that you are studying in, you want to be able to talk about the things you're learning here at CBS, and you want to be able to have sustained, intelligent conversations about it. If you can do that, you're probably on your way to being knowledgeable. But there's another thing you have to do at university before you can say you know something. And that is, you have to be able to write it down. So you have to be able to make up your mind, you have to be able to speak your mind, and you have to be able to write it down. And we can be even more specific about that. If you know something at university, you are able to compose a coherent prose paragraph about it. A paragraph. So this ice cube is going to represent a paragraph. And if I'm going to say that before you know something, you have to be able to compose a coherent prose paragraph about it, I better be able to tell you what a paragraph is, right? And I'm going to give you a definition of what a paragraph is that is very, very useful to you and will be very, very useful, especially if you're writing a large project like this. We can even at some point count up how many ice cubes we're going to need to make an iceberg, right? But I won't give away the ending just yet. Probably I will give it away sometime this evening. I'm going to tell you 9 things about what a paragraph is. That's why I've carved up our ice cube in this way and keep telling you 9 things about a paragraph. These are the 9 things you really want to have mastered. There are some extra details that I will also get into, but they're not central to the problem. So here are the 9 things. First of all, a paragraph always says one thing. right? A paragraph expresses a single clear idea, and it will usually do it in a nice, simple declarative sentence, such as, sense making is a retrospective process, right? That's something that you could know. If you studied that field, you could know that sense making is in fact a retrospective process. It could also be much more factual. That's a quite theoretical one. It could be something like, the internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers. Right? Probably also true, probably something some of you know is true. Right? And there's lots of sentences like that. Relatively simple, straightforward statements that are true. That's what we want. So it always says one thing. But it says it in at least 6 sentences. And I did that wrong. At least 6 sentences. And at most 200 words. Now that sounds really formal, but I really do want to emphasize it. As soon as I say this, there's people start thinking very square, put it in a square box as well. But just remember, that's a pretty big range. You can write 6 sentences of about 80 words altogether, right? You can write 195 words in 13 sentences. Right? So that's a pretty big, like I'm not boxing you in. Ezra Pound used to put this in a very nice way. He said, think of form not as a box within which, but a center around which. Right? So when you're thinking about these proportions, always think about it in terms of, all right, this gives me a space in which to work. Right? It doesn't give me a box that I have to put everything into and fill in. Right? I'm going to work in this space of saying one thing in at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words. The 200 words basically says, don't spend more than a minute of your reader's attention per paragraph. So for every idea, you're going to demand about 1 minute of your reader's attention. That's what the 200 words are for. Right? The 6 sentences say you should carve up your project in ideas that are a little bit heavy. Right? You don't want the ideas to be so easy to say that it only takes 2 sentences to get them across. Right? There are, of course, exceptions, but in general, try to keep it like you want something that has some complexity to it. And that's what those 2 things say. There will definitely be exceptions, but on the whole, in the long run, your paragraphs are going to be at least 6 sentences long and at most 200 words. And they always say one thing. Now, the question then is, why do we have to say at least 6 sentences, right? Why do we have to write these weightier sentences? That's because the key sentence that you have written needs to be difficult in a very particular way. And here we really need to think about your reader, right? So Hemingway said the dignity of the movement of an iceberg. But Virginia Woolf had a really nice thing that she used to say. She used to say, knowing who you're writing for is knowing how to write. So once you've decided what you want to say, right? Once you come up with that one thing you want to say, you have another question, which is, how am I going to say it? And the way you answer that question is you call to mind your reader. And the best thing you can do here is to call to mind not your examiner, not your supervisor, not your teacher, right? Not somebody that's going to judge you, but somebody you're going to have a conversation with, a peer, an intellectual equal. What you want to do is call to mind the most intelligent, serious student in your cohort. If that's you, it's fine, but then make it you about a month ago, right? But it should be somebody else. It's much easier to do if you do it with somebody else, right? And you can even think of a panel of such fellow students, right? So you're going to choose a fellow student that is really on, that is on their game, right? That have been following the course, that understand what's going on, and you're going to be trying to decide, how am I going to say it to them, right? How am I going to say this thing I want to say to them? And then you ask yourself, why does this sentence, sense making is a retrospective process, why does that sentence require more sentences? Why does it need a whole paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words? And the answer to that question is, it's going to be hard in some way. And one way that it could be hard to believe. right? That's a very simple, very common thing in academic writing. You're going to say something, the reader says, sounds good, but it's the kind of thing that I'm not going to believe until you give me some evidence, right? It could just be about the performance of a company you've studied. Sort of think, well, okay, so this company did really well during the pandemic, right? Well, I'll believe it, but I want to know exactly where you get that and what reports are you looking at, what reports are you talking about, on what measure, or did they do really well, and are you sure that's true, right? So they're going to need help believing it. So what you're going to do is write a paragraph that supports your key sentence, right? That's not the only thing that can be difficult in an academic paragraph. The other thing that can happen is that your reader will have a hard time understanding you. So it could be hard to understand your key sentence. Here, sense making as a retrospective process is a really good example, because even the reader that knows a lot about sense making knows that you have some explaining to do. What exactly do you mean by process here? What kind of process are we talking about? And what exactly do you mean by retrospective, right? So there's some more clarification that you have to do. And what that means is you're going to spend your at least 6 sentences elaborating what you mean. So one kind of paragraph is a paragraph that provides evidence, helps the reader to believe by supporting it with evidence. And the other kind of paragraph is one that helps the reader understand by elaborating what you mean. You could be defining terms, you could be telling stories, you could be providing illustrations, that kind of thing, right? 2 different kinds of paragraphs. And then there's the third difficulty that you could run into. This is my favorite one, really. You think about what you want to say, and then you think about your reader, and you realize that your reader has thought about this themselves, because you've had conversations in class, so you know that there are opinions about this. The reader has thought about it, has made up their own mind, and it's not the same opinion that you have, right? They simply disagree with you. The difficulty, that's why it's in red, is to agree, right? So the reader's going to have a hard time granting you this point. And if you decide that that is the relationship between you and your reader on this point, which is a normal state to be in academic writing, then you're going to have to defend yourself. So you're going to defend the reasonableness of your position in the face of the reader's objections. You might even tell the reader that you know the reader's objections, right? I know why you think this is wrong, and here's why I still think I'm right, right? That could be the way you structure that argument. I always emphasize defend at this point, because you're not attacking the reader, right? You're defending yourself. And the reason for that has a lot to do with those 200 words. 200 words is, like I say, 1 minute of your reader's attention. And if you imagine somebody talking at you for 1 minute about something you think is wrong, during that, maybe a week later, you'll say, maybe there was something to that. But you're not going to, during that minute, change your mind. So your writing can't have that as its ambition. Your writing is going to have to be, the only thing I want coming out of this paragraph is that the reader understands that we disagree and that I'm a reasonable person, right? That's all we want. Yes, sir? Yes. Because otherwise you don't have a basis for writing a whole and coherent paragraph, right? It has to have a certain amount of weight. You don't want to have a whole bunch of easy to believe sentences that just sort of flow down the page. You want to have about every half page or so, something that's kind of hard that you need to get across to the reader, but it's not so hard that you can't make it easy within a minute of the reader's attention, right? So it's, I mean, it's not super heavy, but it's got to have a little bit of weight, a little bit of resistance. It's just a way of getting a feel for that stylistic kind of tension that you want in your writing. There is a fourth difficulty. I'll mention it quickly. I always put it like out into the water because it's not really a central difficulty that you should be running into very often. You think about what you want to say to your reader. Could be the internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers. And then you think about your reader. You think, does the reader believe that? Yes. Does the reader understand that? Yes. Does the reader agree with me? Yes. So why am I writing a whole paragraph about it? Right? Maybe it's because the reader is bored. The reader is bored, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about the fact that the internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers. I know this is so old hat in my reader's mind that they can't even be bothered with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a paragraph, 1 minute of my reader's attention. I will only use 1 minute to try to get them a little more excited about it because it's important, right? That, like I say, it should be rare. If every one of your paragraphs feels like that, like you're trying to get your reader on board with this is even interesting, right? Then you're thinking of the wrong reader, because your reader is a peer. Your reader is already interested mainly in your subject matter, right? There might be a little bit where you want to grab a hold of them like that, but it's not going to be the normal thing. So that's out here, out in the water. Boring, right? So the reader is bored. I'll put the reader bored here. And you're going to get them motivated. Right? Good. Things are going pretty well. Like I say, I always think it's 45 minutes, then it's an hour. It's going to be about an hour. I hope that's all right. We have an issue now. I've hopefully made it clear that we have this big project, but we also have this little project, right? And this is the thing you want to be making a number of. We can ask ourselves, how many of these do we have to make? Right? I gave it away, kind of. I said, you're probably going to write about 2 paragraphs to the page. So let's say you have a 20-page research paper that you have to do. It's about 40 paragraphs. How much do you have to know to write 40 paragraphs? You have to know one thing for every paragraph that you write. So that's 40 things that you have to know to write the paper. But remember Hemingway's wisdom. You actually have to write 7 times as much. You have to write 8 times as much as that, right? Because that's only, the 40 is only 1/8. So you have to know about 320 things. Then you choose the 40 things that are most relevant, the best things to say, and you deliver those to your reader. Yeah? Now, how do you become good at writing paragraphs? Oh, I have forgotten a very key constraint on this. You're all very knowledgeable people already. That's one of my privileges, is to talk to people who are knowledgeable. You wouldn't be in this room if you weren't knowledgeable. Every one of you is qualified to be here by some past knowledge that you have. So you know a bunch of things. That means you're able to make up your mind about a bunch of topics. You are able to converse intelligently on a number of issues, number of questions, and in principle, you can compose coherent prose paragraphs of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words about them. But if I asked you all to write down 3 sentences that you know to be true right now, and then invited you to come next week and give them to me at the beginning of the lecture next week, and sure enough you do. You write down 3 sentences that you know to be true, and then you show up next week with 3 coherent prose paragraphs that you have written about those 3 things that support, elaborate, or defend them. And I look at them and I say, yep, they do support, elaborate, or defend. Would that prove that as you sit here tonight, you know those 3 things? You write down 3 sentences you know to be true. Next week, you show me 3 paragraphs that support, elaborate, or defend them in the proper academic manner. Does that prove that you were right to claim tonight that you know them? You all recognize that? That is, in fact, it's very close. What you're saying is, it does not prove that sitting here tonight you know them. It only proves that here are 3 things that if I don't already know them, give me a week, I could learn them, right? And there are hundreds, if not thousands of things that I could probably, just by knowing you're enrolled at CBS, I could be pretty sure that if you don't already know them to be true, if I give you a week and a good reason, you could learn them. So it's not a good test of whether or not you know anything. The only way to make it a good test of whether or not you know those 3 things is to put a time limit on producing the paragraph. So we need an interesting time limit on the production of a paragraph. And I'm going to suggest one to you now. Knowing something for academic purposes is the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it in 27 minutes. 27 minutes. What I can tell you is, if you get yourself into the kind of shape as a writer that lets you produce paragraphs in 27 minutes about anything you know, then you will not regret the effort you made to do that. A few years ago, every year, but a few years ago this happened, we entered the DHL relay race in the park, right? Because a body like this doesn't just happen. And one of our guys on the team showed up. We had 2 teams that year, and Mess showed up to hang out with his team, and only 1 other team member showed up. Now these are 5-person teams, as you may know, and it's a 5-kilometer race, right? 5 kilometers for each participant. So they were about to cancel, but then Mess said, you know what, I'm just going to run 4 times. So he knows he's capable of that. Now, the thing that was impressive was not just that he ran 20 kilometers instead of 5, not just that he ran each of those 5 kilometers faster than me, but that he, in fact, his time running those 5 kilometers, each of those 4 times were within 12 seconds of each other. Right? So he ran 5 kilometers at a time at a pace that was consistent over those 20 kilometers. Right? There is a guy that knows what his body can do, right? Much better than I can. And that is impressive in many ways. It's also enormously useful. Right? Now, what I'm suggesting to you is that you want to get yourself in a position to know what you can do in 27 minutes, writing-wise. Because if you know what you can do for 27 minutes, if you know you can produce a good paragraph that supports, elaborates, or defends something you know, then you're going to be sitting down to write with confidence every time you do it. Of course, the only way to do that is to practice. Right? You're going to have to get yourself in shape. You're going to have to train. And that is what I'm going to try to show you how to do now. Yeah, so it'll take 10 or 15 minutes, then we're done. And of course, then we'll have lots of questions lots of time for questions if you want. And it's something I'll return to week after week, how to do this in practice. But it's really important just to get this basic idea down. Have you ever been told never to start on a blank page when writing? It's just not a good idea to start on a blank page. The blank page is all just an open space. It's just an occasion for anxiety. Anything can happen on a blank page, right? So you want to not start there. And I'm going to show you a trick to get rid of the blank page forever. Okay, that's not it. It's a pretty good trick. It's good for anytime you have a planning problem, just put a line through a page. Now you have a before and an after anyway, right? Like you got something to work with. Today's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday. So always label your problem, give names to your problem. So today's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday. And now I'm going to tell you something that I know you know. It's very obvious, but it is important to remind yourself. Every day comes to an end, and tomorrow is another day. Right? Every day comes to an end tomorrow. This is very important to keep in mind when you're doing a long-term research project. Now, every day comes to an end, and it doesn't just come to an end. It comes to an end at a reasonable hour. Right? Don't let your day come to an end just before you put your head on the pillow. Make sure that you recognize sometime in the late afternoon or early evening that you are not going to get any smarter today. Right? Nothing more is going to fall into place. You're not going to learn anything more. You're not going to make up your mind any better. You're not going to become a better conversationalist. Right? You're done. You're done getting smarter. So your learning day has come to an end. You're going to, after this moment, you're going to relax. Right? So this should happen every day. Every day, you should reach a stage where you quite consciously stop learning and start relaxing. And you can decide how much relaxing you want to have before you sleep. But just before you get there, my suggestion to you is that you prepare something. And this moment, at the end of the day, between learning and relaxing, can't be very long, because then you're still learning. Right? You're done for the day. So it's going to be 5 minutes. At the beginning, if you take 10 minutes, that's fine, but I'm going to encourage you to get that trained down to this should only take 5 minutes. And during those 5 minutes, you're going to come up with at least one thing you know to be true. So if you are studying sense making, you will say sense making is a retrospective process. I know this to be true. Right? Or maybe you'll just say, many scholars believe that sense making is a retrospective process, right? Maybe you're being a little more sophisticated. Maybe that's the level of your knowledge. Whatever it is, right? You're going to write that down in a sentence. And you're going to make an appointment with yourself tomorrow morning. The first intellectually challenging thing you're going to do before getting on to the other intellectually challenging things you're going to do, you're going to write a prose paragraph. You're going to write one prose paragraph that supports, elaborates, or defends this thing you decided the day before. Then you're going to relax, then you're going to sleep. You make this decision, appointment with yourself, give it a specific time. Like, I'm not, you decide when your day begins, but let's say it's 8 o'clock, and you know it's going to end at 8:27. So far, so good? You're with me? All right. This is something any of you can do. You can do this tonight. You can do all of this tonight, right? You just decide, I'm not going to get any smarter. Pick one thing you already know, one thing you're already smart about, and decide to write a paragraph tomorrow morning. Then, this is the magic of the arbitrariness of time. Because you know you're going to start at exactly 8 o'clock, not 7:58 and not 8:03, like not when the coffee is ready, but at exactly 8 o'clock, like you said, right? Because you're going to start at an exact time, you are stepping into a room that is temporally as stable as this room is physically stable, right? This room is a place in space, right? And we can count on it. It's not going to go away on us, right? We're going to be able to stay here. But you're going to step into a room that is just as stable in time because you can trust yourself. So you know that there's going to be the first 2 minutes and the last 5 minutes. You know that before you even start. They're available to you just like the front of the room and the back of the room are available to me before I start, right? The first 2 minutes and the last 5 minutes. That leaves 20 minutes in between. We're going to do some simple math, divide that by 2. So now we have 2, 10, 10, and 5 minutes. And that gives you something to divide up the task of writing your paragraph. I'm going to suggest to you right now 4 different things you can do, right? In those 4 different spaces of time. If you come up with other things, go ahead. Just make sure you show up knowing what you're going to do. Like, don't show up and say, let's see what happens. You're going to show up and do some work, right? And what you're going to do is write a paragraph that supports, elaborates, or defends this. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to pose the key sentence. What I mean by that is you've decided that this is something that is difficult in some way. And now you're going to write it in such a way for the reader that it reminds the reader of that difficulty. So you could say, many people think that sense-making is a retrospective process, right? Now, what that suggests is that your key sentence is the opposite. Sense-making isn't always a retrospective process. That's your key sentence. That's what you came up with the day before. But the next day, when you sit down to think about how to pitch this to the reader, you're going to twist it a little bit, right? You're going to say, I'm going to point out to the reader that they're going to find my actual key sentence, which is that it's not always a retrospective process. They're going to find that difficult, right? So I'm going to twist a little bit. Now, it doesn't have to be twisted. Sometimes it's exactly what you came up with the day before. And all you're going to do for those 2 minutes is type it and really think about it for 2 minutes, decide this is what I'm trying to say. You're going to spend 2 minutes focusing on that key sentence, right? Oops, that's not even a pen. This is the key sentence. You are then going to spend 10 minutes writing. And those 10 minutes are really, you really want to make sure that what you're doing there is writing sentences. And remember that you've got 10 minutes, you're going to write as many sentences as you can. You might write way more than you need. You should probably think about writing about a sentence a minute here. And the way you decide what to write is it has to be about the same thing. So it has to be about the retrospective or prospective nature of sense making, whatever you've decided, right? But they have to be easier to believe, understand, or agree with, because these have to be sentences that would help somebody who found your key sentence a little bit difficult. These have to be sentences that are easier to believe. Right? A very simple case of this is if you say the employees of the company that I interviewed are dissatisfied with their CEO. Right? If that's your key sentence, you want to say the employees are not satisfied with their leadership. That's kind of hard to believe. I mean, it's not impossible to believe, but you want to see some evidence, right? Well, what would be easier to believe? Well, what would be easier to believe is a whole bunch of quotations from the interviews that we know how you did and therefore trust, right? So what you need now is some sentences that paraphrase and quote employees saying things that if they say these things, then surely that means they're not satisfied with their CEO. So what you're doing is you're trying to structure a paragraph in such a way that the key sentence is a little bit hard and the rest of the sentences are a little bit easier. And so the rest of the sentences give the reader a way of believing or understanding or agreeing. Right? You're going to do that for 10 minutes. You will then switch over into a different mode, which is you're going to start composing. And here we need to look at the page again. And notice the page is not by no means blank, because you've got at least a key sentence on there. You've got a whole bunch of other sentences spread around on that page. But what you want to do now is you want to make sure that your paragraph comes into view. So instead of just having a bunch of sentences that you just generated as quickly as you could, you're going to take that material and organize it for 10 minutes into a paragraph, into something that actually looks like a paragraph. It sometimes has that indent at the beginning, depending on how you set up your page. Right? Definitely has a hard line return at the end. Right? That's what you're gonna do for 10 minutes. All right, so we've got 22 minutes of writing so far. We're almost there. 5 minutes to the end. At 22 minutes into your writing moment, here's what I suggest you do. You're going to read what you've written. And what this means is by the time you get here, 22 minutes in, you need to have this thing done. It has to be there visually, has to be clean on the page. And then you're going to read out loud. Right? So you're going to sit by yourself and you're going to read your text out loud. Why? Because this margin here is arbitrary. It doesn't matter. That margin is only there because of the way you set up the page and because of the font you chose and whatever, right? So what you really are dealing with here is a line of sentences, right? And you chose every word in this order. And what you want to know is, does it work? Does it come off the page in a good way, right? Is this readable? So you're going to read this just from one end to the next, and you're going to see if it works. And you will find out it does not work. Wow, it doesn't work as perfectly as you were hoping at the time that you were writing it, right? There's going to be some slight defects. And now you have 3 or 4 minutes and no more to be a perfectionist, right? To let that part of you in that's vain about your language, right? Vain about your expression, but you're not going. They didn't get in there until now. Now they get 3 or 4 minutes to fix what they can, and then you're done. It's over. The 27 minutes are up. You take a 3-minute break, and you get on with your day. Right? At later stages, when you're writing the whole thing, getting on with your day means getting on with the next paragraph that you also decided the day before to write the next day, and you're going to write 6 paragraphs in a row for 3 hours, right? That is also a way of getting on with it. But you're not going to get stuck on that paragraph. That paragraph is now as good as it can be today. If you're going to rewrite it tomorrow, right? You're done with it for today. Yep.
It does sound very logical for some part of the research paper, but what if you use a specific model for your analysis and such, and it already has a structure how to use that model?
Yes, we could talk about it specifically, and maybe when we get back to how to write the analysis, we can really talk about it, or maybe even how we write the theory. There really isn't any idea in my book that can't be turned into a key sentence and then into a paragraph. So whatever you're going to be saying will at some point be able to be formed into a paragraph. It's just about what that key sentence is going to say. Maybe it'll say something about the model. Maybe it'll say something about a concept from the model. Maybe it'll say something about a parameter that has been shifted in a certain way in your analysis. These are all, but these are just facts that you're going to report in a paragraph. Good, clear. And then this part is really important. You then stop, you take a 3-minute break, you don't do anything. You maybe do some shoulder exercises, right? Let's do a piece of music, walk around the room a little bit. Try not to get on with your day already. Take the 3-minute break first. And what you're signaling to yourself there is that your writer has been given the 27 minutes you promised the writer, right? And the writer did the best they could, and the writer is not satisfied. The writer wants to do more, but the writer will get another chance tomorrow to do better, right? The writer will not get a chance to keep going. This is something I learned when running, right? Is that if you run 5K and you weren't satisfied, you don't fix that problem by running another 5K right away, right? You wait a day and then you try to do better next time, right? Because you're done. You're done. You've done what you could today on that. Do you want to hear a little story before we take a break, and then we'll do questions? Do you know who Uri Geller is? Uri Geller was famous in the 1970s for being able to bend spoons with the power of his mind, right? So he's a spoon bending guy. And what he did was he got so famous for this that he ended up on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And what he didn't know about Johnny Carson is that Johnny Carson was a skeptic, a debunker of the paranormal. So he was a little bit dubious about this ability. So he invited his friend, James the Amazing Randi, who's a magician, as the name suggests. And magicians are somewhat offended by people who claim to actually have magical powers because they fake them. So there's a bit of a competition there. And so Johnny asked Randy, can you set up the studio that night so that if there's any trickery, he won't be able to do it? And Randy said, yeah, I can try to anticipate what he might be doing, and then we'll set up some things. They set up the studio in that way. And that night, Uri Geller, sure enough, was tired and couldn't bend spoons with the power of his mind because he, well, and maybe he was tired. I'm not going to decide that question. They asked Randy about the incident, and he has said something that I always thought was very clever. He said, you know, I don't actually know how he does it, but if he's using his mind to bend those spoons, he's doing it the hard way. There's an easy way to bend spoons. You do it with your hands, right? And then what you do if you're a magician is you conceal the part where you bent the spoon with your hand from the audience, and then you bring out the spoon at the opportune moment, and it looks like you bent the spoon with the power of your mind. So why do I tell writers that? You probably thought that you were going to write your research projects with the power of your minds. You were going to concentrate really hard. And this is as silly as sitting in front of the computer, concentrating really hard and hoping that the words will appear on the screen. That technology does not exist, right? So what I'm going to suggest you do is you use your minds for the thing that it was intended, which is to get smarter, to learn things, to satisfy your curiosity, to be creative, to solve intellectual problems, so forth, right? Just to get smarter. And then write your research projects with your hands. Train your hands to write down anything you have on your mind in paragraphs of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words in 27 minutes. So if you know it, then you also know that you can produce the paragraph. And it's just about having your prose in shape to do that. And so I'll leave you with this final thing. Please, when you sit down to write, remember that you're going to take 27 minutes. You're going to take a writing moment of 27 minutes to produce a reading moment for your reader that will last no more than a minute, because you're going to keep it to under 200 words. What does that mean? That means you are 27 times smarter than your reader, 27 times stronger, 27 times more intelligent, 27 times more charming than your reader. You can hide everything from the reader. You do all this handiwork, you hide it all from the reader, And then you bring out the bent spoon at the end. You just show them a bent spoon. They don't even have to be watching while you're bending the spoon, right? In writing, you just say, well, I bent the spoon with my mind, right? And then they have to believe you, right? Writing is the ultimate magic trick. It's all set up, and it's all your hidden setup, and then it's all just an effect. Learn to enjoy that advantage, right? You are 27 times stronger than your reader, right? And your reader is somebody you know. Sit down again and again and again and enjoy it, right? Really just feel that advantage and learn to use it, right? Learn to use it to your advantage. That's my advice to you in general for writing research projects. And over the next 12 weeks, we'll get into the details of how to apply that attitude to each of the different sections, right? And then with some also slightly more general things. I hope that was useful to you. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then you can either leave or you can stay or you can come back in 5 minutes, and then I'll answer any questions that you have.